I kept my expression neutral as I slid the folder across my boss's desk. He picked it up, flipped it open, and I watched the color drain from his face as he read the first page. "What is this?" he asked. "My resignation," I said. "And the rest explains itself." He turned to the second page, then the third. His jaw tightened. He looked up at me, and for the first time in 11 years, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't anger, it was fear. I picked up my bag, buttoned my blazer, and walked out of his office without another word. That was a Tuesday morning in March. By Friday, the agency I had spent 11 years building from a mid-size regional firm into one of the most recognized names in healthcare communications on the East Coast would begin to understand exactly what they had lost. Not just me, but everything I had brought with me. Let me go back to the beginning. I joined Hartwell & Associates fresh out of grad school at 26. I had a communications degree, a mountain of student loans, and enough ambition to fuel a small city. The agency was good, then solid client roster, decent reputation, a managing partner named Richard, who gave long speeches at company retreats about meritocracy and rewarding the people who delivered results. I believed him. For a long time, I believed every word. My first year, I was assigned to support the pharmaceutical division. It was unglamorous work. Most of my colleagues preferred the consumer brands, the beauty companies, the lifestyle accounts, the clients who threw launch parties and sent gift baskets at the holidays. Pharma was dense, regulatory. You had to understand FDA guidance the way a lawyer understood case law. You had to write with precision because a single careless phrase in a press release could trigger a compliance review. Nobody wanted it. I did. I spent nights learning the landscape. I read industry journals. I built relationships with medical journalists who covered drug approvals and clinical trial outcomes. Within 16 months, I had become the person everyone came to when a pharmaceutical client had a crisis, a launch, or a question that nobody else could answer. Richard noticed. He told me I had a gift for it. He told me I was exactly the kind of person the agency needed to grow. I was 32 when I brought in my first major account, a mid-sized biotech company looking to build its public profile ahead of a major drug approval. I pitched them myself. I prepared the presentation over 4 weekends, refined it 11 times, and delivered it in a conference room in Boston with 3 of their senior executives watching me from across a long table. We signed the contract 6 days later. That account grew, and then I brought in another, and then another. By the time I was 35, I was managing a portfolio that represented nearly a third of the agency's pharmaceutical revenue. I had built a team of 7 people. I had a track record that any account director would be proud to put on their resume. I was also passed over for promotion 3 times. The first time Richard told me the timing wasn't right. The agency was restructuring. He needed me focused on client work, not internal transitions. I nodded and went back to my desk and worked harder. The second time, the role went to a man who had been at the agency for 4 years. He was competent, pleasant. He had never managed a major account independently and had no experience in pharmaceutical communications. Richard told me he had strong leadership instincts and that he saw a lot of potential in him. He also told me he valued me deeply and that my time was coming. I smiled and congratulated my new colleague and went back to my desk and worked harder. The third time, I had been told explicitly that the VP position opening in the healthcare division was mine. Richard sat with me in his office for 35 minutes. He walked me through what the role would involve. He asked me how I would approach building out the team. I gave him answers. He nodded. He said, "Diana, I think you're exactly what this division needs." I left that meeting certain enough to turn down a recruiter call I had received the week before, from a competing agency. 2 months later, Richard called me into his office again. The woman sitting in the chair beside his desk was named Kristen. She had joined the agency 19 months earlier as an account supervisor. She was 32, attractive, and extraordinarily skilled at making Richard feel like the most insightful person in any room. She laughed at his observations in client meetings. She referenced his past decisions as examples of visionary thinking in presentations. She sent him articles she thought he would find interesting with handwritten notes attached. She was, by any reasonable measure, a solid professional. She was not, by any reasonable measure, more qualified than me for that role. "I wanted to tell you directly," Richard said. "I've decided to bring Kristen into the VP position. I think she brings a freshness to the team that we need right now. A new energy." I looked at Kristen. She gave me a small smile that she had clearly practiced. "I want you to know," Richard continued, "that your contributions here are invaluable. This wasn't a reflection of your work. Your work is exceptional." "Thank you," I said. "I hope you understand," he said. "I understand completely," I said. And for the first time, I meant it. Not in the way he intended. I understood completely not the reasoning he was offering, which was polished nonsense, but the reality underneath it. I understood that Richard did not promote based on results. He promoted based on proximity, on comfort, on who made him feel most secure in his own position. I was too good at what I did to feel threatening to most people. But Richard was the kind of man who could only feel confident when the people around him needed him more than he needed them. I had stopped needing him somewhere around year 4. I just hadn't done anything about it. I left his office that day with something I hadn't expected. Not bitterness, clarity. I drove home that evening and sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours. I listed on a single piece of paper everything I had. My client relationships, which were deep and genuine. My team, 4 of whom I knew were loyal to me specifically, not to the agency. My knowledge of the space, which had taken 10 years to build and could not be replicated quickly. My reputation in the industry, which was my own, and had never really belonged to Hartwell and Associates at all. And then I listed everything I needed to do. I want to be clear about something, because I've told this story to a few people, and some of them have looked at me as if I must have been acting impulsively or emotionally. I was not. I was cold about it. I was methodical. I was more focused in the 6 months that followed than I had been in years, because for the first time in a long time, I was working towards something that was entirely mine. The first call I made was to an attorney, a woman I had met through a client event 3 years earlier, who specialized in employment and business law. I explained my situation. I asked 3 questions. What was I legally permitted to take with me when I left? What conversations could I have with clients before my resignation? And what did I need to be careful about? She gave me answers. Some of them I had expected. Some of them were more favorable than I had hoped. The second thing I did was speak quietly with my team. Not all of them. The 4 I trusted. I did not ask them to commit to anything. I told them only that I was considering starting my own firm, and that if I did, I would want them with me, and that I would give them enough notice to make their own decisions. 2 of them cried, which I had not expected. One of them said she had been waiting for this conversation for 2 years. The third thing I did was have dinner with my longest-standing client. I had managed his company's communications for 8 years. He was the founder and CEO of a specialty pharmaceutical company that had grown from a small clinical stage operation into a publicly traded business with 3 approved therapies and a pipeline that analysts consistently flagged as one of the strongest in its category. His name was not important. What was important was that over 8 years we had built something that went beyond a vendor relationship. He called me when he needed to think out loud. When his company faced a crisis 2 years earlier, a manufacturing issue that threatened their lead product supply chain, I had managed the communications response personally for 6 consecutive weeks. When it was over, he had shaken my hand and told me that I had saved his company's reputation. I asked him to meet me for dinner under the pretense of discussing their upcoming annual report communications. We met at a restaurant we had been to before. Over the first course, I told him what I was planning. I told him I was leaving Hartwell and Associates. I told him I was starting my own firm. I told him I believed I could offer him better, more focused service as an independent operator than I could as an employee of a large agency with competing priorities. He listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions. The first was about my timeline. The second was about staffing. I answered both. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Diana, I have to be honest with you. Half the reason we've stayed with Hartwell this long is because of you. The agency is the vehicle. You're the engine. He signed the letter of intent before I left the restaurant that evening. We formalized the contract 3 weeks later. Over the following month, I had similar conversations with 2 other clients whose accounts I had managed personally for years. A medical device company whose head of corporate communications had been a colleague of mine from graduate school. A non-profit hospital network whose communications director had once told my boss, directly, that she would leave the account if I was ever reassigned. Both of them moved. I incorporated the business on a Thursday. I signed the lease on a small office suite on a Friday. I hired an operations manager on Tuesday. On the following Tuesday morning, I walked into Richard's office, set the folder on his desk, and watched him open it. The first page was my formal resignation letter, effective in 2 weeks. The second page was a letter from my anchor client, formally notifying Hartwell and Associates of their decision not to renew their contract upon its upcoming expiration, in accordance with its terms. The third and fourth pages were the same letters from the other 2 clients. "What is this?" he had asked. I had told him. And then I had left. The 3 weeks of my notice period were, I will admit, uncomfortable. Richard called me into his office twice more. The first time he was calm and professional and asked whether there was anything the agency could offer to change my mind. I told him there wasn't. The second time, he was neither calm nor professional. He told me what I was doing was disloyal. He told me I was burning bridges. He told me the industry was smaller than I thought and that people would remember this. I thanked him for his years of guidance and excused myself. Kristen stopped by my desk on my last day. She was carrying a coffee and wearing an expression that was trying hard to be neutral and failing slightly. "I hope there are no hard feelings," she said. "None at all," I said. And I meant that too. She had been playing the game she understood, within the system that rewarded it. That was her calculation to make. My calculation had been different, and I had made it. The Monday morning after my notice period ended, I walked into an office with my name on the door. It was smaller than the one I had left. The carpet was not as expensive. The conference room held 8 people, not 20. My team at launch was 6 people, 4 from Hartwell. 2 new hires I had recruited specifically for their expertise in digital health communications, a growing specialty that I believed would define the next decade of pharmaceutical PR. The first 3 months were difficult in the way that honest things are difficult. There was no infrastructure to lean on. Every process had to be built. Every vendor relationship had to be established. There were weeks where I worked until midnight and still felt behind. There were moments, usually around 1 a.m, when a version of doubt would visit me and ask whether I had miscalculated. I let it ask. Then I went back to work. My anchor client referred us to 2 of his peers at other companies within our first quarter. One of those conversations became a signed contract before the quarter closed. The other became a contract 3 months after that. Word moved through the industry in the way it always does when someone who has a strong reputation makes a visible move carefully, through the right channels, faster than you expect. By the end of our first year, we had 9 clients and a team of 14. We had been featured in 2 industry trade publications. One of them described us as one of the most notable new entrants in healthcare communications in recent years. My operations manager printed that article and taped it to the refrigerator in our break room. I left it there. I heard through a former colleague that Hartwell and Associates had a difficult year, that losing 3 major pharmaceutical accounts in the same quarter had created a revenue gap that required restructuring, that 2 other members of my old division had departed in the months following my exit. I did not know the details and did not seek them out. It was not my concern. What was my concern was the meeting I had scheduled for that December, a conversation with an investment group that had approached us about a minority partnership to fund our expansion into 2 new markets. The valuation they put on the business was a number I had written down on a piece of paper 10 months earlier as a goal for year 4. We had reached it in year 1. I sat at the head of the conference table that morning and thought about the last time I had sat at a conference table, as someone whose value was being decided by someone else. The contrast was not lost on me. I thought about Richard and his speeches about meritocracy. I thought about all the years I had believed that if I kept delivering, the recognition would follow. I thought about the moment I finally understood. That recognition from someone who doesn't have the capacity to give it honestly is not recognition worth waiting for. And I thought about the folder I had slid across his desk on that Tuesday morning in March. About the look on his face. About the way the fear in his eyes had felt not like revenge, but like accuracy. Like the moment when reality finally matched what had always been true. After the meeting, I walked to the window of my conference room. It overlooked a small courtyard with a fountain that didn't work in winter. My operations manager knocked and let herself in. "They want to move to the next step," she said. "I know," I said. "You don't seem excited." I turned from the window. "I'm past excited," I said. "I'm just getting started." She laughed. I laughed too. Then we went back to work. There is something I want to say to anyone who finds themselves where I was not the specifics of my situation, but the feeling of it. The feeling of having done everything you were told to do, having delivered everything that was asked and watching. Someone who did less and smiled more walk past you through a door you had built with your own hands. I am not going to tell you the system is fair. It is not always fair. I am not going to tell you that patience is a virtue in a place that mistakes your patience for contentment. It is not always a virtue. What I will tell you is this. The things you have built are real. Your knowledge is real. Your relationships are real. Your reputation is real. And those things belong to you, not to the office, not to the title, not to the person who decided you weren't the right fit. They belong to you. And no one can promote them away from you. The investment closed in February. We opened our second office in May. On the day we signed the lease, my team gathered in the new space, which was empty except for us and a few dozen boxes, and someone had brought a bottle of good champagne. I looked at the people around me, the ones who had followed me from Hartwell, the ones I had hired, the ones who had taken a risk on a new firm because they believed in what we were building, and I felt something I had spent a long time waiting to feel. Not justified, not vindicated. Something quieter than that. Whole. I raised my glass. Someone said something funny about the carpet, which was, admittedly, aggressively beige. We laughed, we drank, and then we got back to work. Do subscribe.